He said the doctor would make it so I could never give him children. But he didn't know a secret was already blooming deep inside me. Hello, my precious friends. It's a true delight to have you with me here today. Please come in and make yourself comfortable. Imagine you're right here in my small sitting room, sharing a warm drink with me. My name is Alina Marie Vance. I'm 74 years old, born and raised in a town called Willow Creek. It's where my heart has always lived. Before we go any further, I have a gentle request for all of you. Would you be so kind as to tell me in the comments below what town or city you're joining me from today? And what hour of the day did this story find you? Was it the quiet of dawn, the busyness of noon, or the peaceful evening? I cherish each word you share. Let's weave a tapestry of connection across miles and moments. And if you feel moved, please tap that like button and subscribe to Winds of Thought. Ring the bell so you don't miss our next conversation together. I promise it will be meaningful. But my darling, I must tell you, my life hasn't always been this calm. There was a chapter, a deeply painful one, when I wasn't sure I possessed the strength to carry on. A time when the person who vowed to cherish me sought to steal my most sacred possibility. This tale, though it aches to recall, must be spoken. Because now, as I watch the birds in my garden and hear my grandchildren's laughter, I understand every sorrow, every fearful night, every lonely hour was part of a greater design. So, settle in, my dear listener, and journey back with me to when I was a young woman of 21. I was raised in Willow Creek, a place of rolling hills and tight-knit communities. My father was a quiet man who worked the land, his hands always etched with soil and strength. My mother was his opposite, filling our small home with song and constant chatter. We were a family of modest means but abundant in spirit. I shared a room with my sisters, and our days were marked by school, chores, and the simple joys of childhood games. Even then, I sensed a different path awaited my brothers. Their world seemed wider, their futures less predetermined. For my sisters and me, the expectation was clear: become a proper lady, a capable homemaker, and find a good match. My own schooling ended early, as was common then. My education shifted to the arts of the household: baking, sewing, tending a home. A part of me always yearned for more, for a world of choices, but I accepted my lot. Then, at a community dance in the autumn of 1973, I met Robert Alastair Blackwood. He was older, polished, and carried an air of command that felt like stability to a girl like me. My family saw his interest as a blessing, a gateway to security. Robert came from a family of considerable local standing, owners of large tracts of timberland. He spoke of providing a comfortable life, a beautiful home, freedom from want. It wasn't the passionate love from storybooks, but I believed affection could grow, and more importantly, I felt the weight of my family's hopes. We were married the following spring. I was 22. The grand house he brought me to felt more like a museum than a home. His father, a stern and ailing man, resided with us. His passing was swift after our wedding. Then came the reading of the will. We gathered in the formal study. The lawyer, a meticulous man named Mr. Abernathy, read the terms aloud. Robert's face, initially proud, transformed into a mask of sheer fury. The inheritance was vast, but it came with a single binding condition. The full estate would only transfer upon the birth of a legitimate grandchild, a direct heir to secure the family legacy. Until that day, Robert would receive only a modest monthly stipend. He erupted in rage, calling it an insult. After the others left, he turned his anger into a calculated lie meant just for me. He took my face in his hands, his eyes hard. "Alina," he said, "you must understand. The clause is the opposite. If we have a child, we lose everything. The money, the land, all of it. We will be destitute." I was so young, so trained to defer, that I swallowed this terrible falsehood whole. My world became a gilded cage. Robert grew cold and distant, isolating me from family and friends. The pressure from society was constant. When would the heir arrive? He would smile in public and seethe in private, blaming the cruel will and my body for our supposed predicament. The loneliness was a physical ache. Then, one evening, he announced he had arranged a medical consultation. He said I had been unwell, complaining of pains, and he was concerned. A trusted doctor friend would see me. I was confused. I hadn't been ill, but I dared not contradict him. The clinic was sterile and quiet. The examination was brief. A week later, we returned. Robert spoke privately with the doctor, then delivered the verdict to me. I required a minor surgical procedure to remove a growth. It was scheduled immediately. The morning of the operation was gray and damp. At the clinic, a nurse prepped me, and an IV sent a cold lethargy through my veins. As I lay helpless on that gurney, Robert leaned down. His whisper slithered into my ear, a venomous secret. He confessed he had paid the physician. There was no growth. The procedure was to ensure I could never conceive, to permanently eliminate the threat of an heir. He had plans to forge documents later, he said. I was merely an obstacle to be removed. Paralysis from the drugs trapped my scream inside. He left with a faint, cruel smile. Then the doctor entered. He checked the monitors, his eyes meeting my terrified, pleading gaze. For a long moment he just looked at me. Then, as he adjusted the mask over my face, his fingers slipped a tiny, folded square of paper into my limp hand, closing my fingers around it. His whisper was barely audible. "After, trust no one." Darkness swallowed me. I awoke in a recovery room, the antiseptic smell thick in the air. The memory crashed over me, Robert's words, my powerlessness. A deep, hollow pain resonated within. It was over. He had won. Then a crinkle in my clenched fist. The note. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. The scrawled pencil words are etched in my soul. Procedure not performed, only superficial incision. Your pre-op tests confirm pregnancy, approximately 3 weeks. Guard this life. He must not know. I read those words until they blurred. A storm of emotions, terror, elation, disbelief, rained down upon me. I was with child. The very heir Robert feared was already here, and the doctor had risked everything to spare us. I hid the note, my mind racing. This was my secret. This was my power. I became an actress in my own home. I feigned recovery, a profound sadness at my supposed barrenness. Robert, believing himself victorious, treated me with detached courtesy. I wore looser clothes, invented ailments to explain any changes. Inside, a fierce, protective love for my unborn child grew hourly. I knew I needed an ally. I remembered Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. On days Robert was away, I made furtive calls. When I finally reached him, my voice shook as I asked for the truth of the will's clause. His confirmation was swift. An heir was required, not forbidden. "Are you in danger, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked gravely. With his promise of support, I began to weave my plan. Dr. Sawyer provided documented proof of my pregnancy and his ethical refusal. Mr. Abernathy secured it all. We waited for the perfect moment. It arrived months later, at a dinner Robert hosted to impress local dignitaries and a judge, aiming to propose a scheme to bypass the will. The table was set with fine silver, the air thick with his ambition. After the meal, as they retired to the study, I made my entrance. I had shed all disguises. The dress I wore hugged the unmistakable curve of my 5-month pregnancy. The room fell silent. Robert's glass shattered on the floor. "Impossible!" he shouted, his composure obliterated. "You're sterile. I paid to have you cut." The horrified silence that followed was deafening. I spoke then, clear and strong, revealing his lie and his crime. Mr. Abernathy presented the medical evidence. The judge listened, his expression turning to stone. The will's protective clause for such treachery was invoked. Control of the entire estate passed to me as the mother of the rightful heir. Robert was ejected from the house that very night, left with nothing but the allowance he despised. My son Benjamin was born into freedom and love. I raised him with all the warmth and wisdom I possessed, ensuring he knew his value was in his character, not his inheritance. Robert lived out his days in bitterness and isolation. The fortune became a tool for good. We supported schools, shelters, our community. Today, I live simply, surrounded by my garden, my books, and my family. The scars healed, transformed into strength. If you are in a cage of someone else's making, know that the key is often your own hidden truth. My dearest friends, if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience, please do like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought. Your support helps these messages of hope find those who need them most. In the comments, I ask you, what single word defines courage for you? I will read every one. Never forget, even in the deepest winter, a seed is waiting to rise. May you find your strength. Thank you for listening. Now let me tell you about Willow Creek in the spring, because that season holds a magic all its own. The hills would turn from dull brown to a vibrant, hopeful green almost overnight. The creek itself, which gave our town its name, would swell with snowmelt, its voice changing from a quiet whisper to a cheerful, rushing song you could hear from my childhood bedroom window if the wind was right. My mother would throw open every window in our little house, airing out the stuffy winter smells, letting in the scent of damp earth and the first brave crocuses pushing through the cold ground. She'd hum as she did it, some old tune whose name I never knew, but the melody was the sound of optimism itself. My sisters and I would be tasked with the annual spring cleaning, which was less about cleaning and more about rediscovering things we'd forgotten over the long winter. We'd find a lost hair ribbon under a bed, a marble that had rolled into a corner, a drawing we'd made that had fallen behind the dresser. Each little rediscovery felt like finding a piece of ourselves again. My father would come in from the fields a little later, his boots caked with the rich, dark mud, and he'd leave them on the porch with a sigh that was equal parts exhaustion and satisfaction. You could see the day's work in the set of his shoulders, but also a lightness that hadn't been there in February. The land was waking up, and so was he. My brothers, of course, had a different relationship with spring. To them, it meant more chores, true, but also freedom. They could disappear for hours into the woods that bordered our property, coming back with pockets full of interesting stones, tailies of animal tracks, or sometimes, if they were lucky, a few morel mushrooms that my mother would fry in butter for a special supper. I watched them go with a familiar pang, a mixture of envy and resentment that I tried to smother. My domain was indoors, with the baking and the mending. But sometimes, on a Saturday, if my chores were done early and my mother was in a generous mood, she'd let me take a basket and go with my friend Margie to the edge of those same woods to collect wild violets. We weren't to go in, of course, just stay where we could still see the roof of our house. But those were precious expeditions. We'd kneel in the cool grass, the delicate purple and white faces of the violets looking up at us, and we'd talk. We'd talk about everything and nothing. About the new teacher at school, about which boys we thought were tolerable and which were ridiculous, about what we imagined our lives would be like in 10 years. Margie wanted to be a nurse. She'd seen one once when her little brother was very sick, and the calm, capable way the woman moved had stuck with her. I never had a clear answer. "I suppose I'll be married," I'd say, and it felt like a script I was reciting, not a dream I was describing. "To someone nice, I hope," Margie would nod, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the same doubt that fluttered in my own stomach. Nice seemed like such a small, fragile word to build a whole life upon. The spring dances were the highlight of the season, the social event that everyone talked about for weeks beforehand. The town hall would be scrubbed and decorated with streamers and lanterns. A local band would be hired, their music a little rusty from disuse over the winter but full of earnest energy. The girls would spend days agonizing over their dresses, altering hand-me-downs, or, if they were very fortunate, working on a new one from fabric saved for all year. My dress for the dance where I met Robert was a pale yellow cotton, with a modest neckline and small, embroidered flowers around the collar that I had stitched myself during the long winter evenings. It was the nicest thing I owned. My mother had helped me set my hair in rags the night before, and when she unrolled them that afternoon, my dark hair fell in soft, if somewhat frizzy, waves. She looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of pride and sadness. "You look so grown, Alina," she'd said, her voice thick. "My little girl." I remember feeling impatient with the sentimentality. I was 21. I wasn't a little girl. I was ready for my life to begin, though I had no real picture of what that life should contain, only a hazy sense that it waited for me somewhere beyond our front door, probably in the form of a man who would provide it. The dance itself was a whirl of noise and color and nervous energy. The air smelled of lemon punch, talcum powder, and the faint, not unpleasant scent of bodies in a warm room. I stood with Margie and a few other girls from our year, sipping our punch, pretending we weren't scanning the room, evaluating and being evaluated in turn. The boys clustered on the other side, their laughter louder, their movements more awkward. And then there were the men, not boys, but men like Robert. They stood near the back, closer to the tables where the fathers and town elders gathered, talking in lower tones, their suits sharper, their demeanors assured. Robert stood out even among them. He was tall, yes, but it was his posture that commanded attention. He stood perfectly straight, not stiff, but with an easy authority, as if the room and everyone in it were within his purview. His hair was dark and swept back from a high forehead, and he held a glass of something amber-colored, not the weak punch the rest of us drank. His eyes moved across the crowd, not searching but assessing. When they landed on me, they paused. I felt it like a physical touch, a sudden warmth on my skin. I looked away quickly, my heart doing a funny little stumble in my chest. When I dared glance back, he was speaking to an older man I recognized as Mr. Dalrymple, who owned the feed store. But a few minutes later, he was making his way across the floor, people subtly parting for him. He stopped in front of my father, who was talking with a neighbor. I saw my father's face shift, his conversational smile becoming something more formal, attentive. Robert spoke to him, nodded, and then my father turned and gestured to me. My feet felt rooted to the floor. Margie gave me a tiny, urgent nudge with her elbow. I walked over, the sea of faces around me blurring. "Alina, this is Mr. Robert Blackwood," my father said, his voice unusually hearty. "Robert, my daughter, Alina." Robert took my hand, not to shake it, but to hold it lightly in his own for a moment. His hand was warm and dry. "A pleasure, Miss Vance," he said. His voice was deeper than I expected, smooth. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" I could only nod, my throat tight. He led me to the floor as a waltz began. I was a competent dancer, having practiced with my sisters and the backs of chairs, but dancing with Robert was different. He led firmly, leaving no room for hesitation. I had to follow his movements completely, surrendering my own sense of balance to his guidance. It was unsettling and, in a strange way, exhilarating. He didn't make small talk about the weather or the band. He asked about my family, about my father's work, questions that felt more like an interview than conversation. I answered as best I could, my voice small. As the song was ending, he leaned in slightly. "You have a very graceful bearing, Alina," he said. It wasn't a compliment about my looks. It was an observation about my posture, my demeanor. It felt like he was evaluating a quality, not admiring a person. I murmured a thank you, and he escorted me back to my father. "You have a lovely daughter, Mr. Vance," he said, before giving a slight bow and returning to his companions. That was it. That was the beginning, but in the car on the way home, my father was almost effusive. "Robert Blackwood, Ellie, do you know what that means? The Blackwoods own half the county. Timber, land, he's a man of substance." My mother, quieter, asked, "Was he kind, dear?" "He was polite," I said, which was the truth. Kindness didn't seem to enter into it. Politeness was a form of currency, a social ritual, and Robert was very rich in that currency. His courtship, if you could call it that, was conducted with the same efficient purpose. He would visit on Sunday afternoons, always bringing a gift, a box of fine chocolates, a lace handkerchief, a book of poetry I was too nervous to properly read. He would sit in our parlor, making conversation with my parents while I served tea. He spoke of his business, of travel to cities I'd only read about, of plans for expanding his holdings. He spoke to my parents about providing stability, a secure future. He painted a picture of a life so distant from my own it felt like a storybook, a large, well-staffed home. Financial security that meant never worrying about the price of flour or the patching of a roof. Social standing. To my parents, who had scraped and saved and worried their entire lives, it must have sounded like salvation. To me, it sounded like a peaceful, beautiful dream. I mistook the absence of immediate hardship for the presence of happiness. I didn't love him. I didn't know him. But I was taught that love was something that grew from respect and shared duty, not a prerequisite for marriage. And I respected him. How could I not? Everyone around me did. The wedding was a quiet, formal affair at the Willow Creek Presbyterian Church. My dress was simple but elegant, bought with money Robert had given my parents for the purpose. I remember the feel of the cool silk under my fingers, the weight of the small pearl buttons down the back. I remember my mother's face as she fixed my veil, tears in her eyes but a determined smile on her lips. "You'll be fine, my girl. You're strong." I remember the solemnity of the vows, the pressure of Robert's ring being slid onto my finger. I remember the drive to the grand house on the hill, the one I'd seen from a distance my whole life but never entered. Robert's father, a gaunt, unsmiling man in a wheelchair, was waiting in the foyer. He looked me up and down, gave a single, grunted HMPH, and was wheeled away by a nurse. That was my welcome. The house was indeed beautiful, but its beauty was cold. High ceilings echoed with silence. Dark wood paneling absorbed the light. Thick carpets muffled footsteps. It felt like a place where noise and life were not just absent, but forbidden. My new bedroom was large, with a four-poster bed and a vanity, but the windows looked out over the formal gardens, manicured and precise, not the wild, tumbling beauty of the woods I loved. That first night, Robert came to the room. He was not unkind, but he was businesslike, almost clinical. It was a transaction, the consummation of a contract. Afterwards, he kissed my forehead, said "Good night, Alina," and went to his own room down the hall. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling, feeling utterly, profoundly alone in the vast silence. The gilded cage, though I wouldn't have used those words then, had its door shut softly behind me. Life settled into a routine of exquisite loneliness. My days were empty of purpose. Mrs. Dobbs, the housekeeper, a woman with a face like a clenched fist, ran the household with iron efficiency. There was little for me to do. I would arrange flowers that a gardener had already cut and brought in. I would attempt embroidery, but my heart wasn't in it. I would walk in the formal gardens, but their perfect order felt oppressive. I missed the messy, joyful chaos of my family's home. I missed the sound of my sisters squabbling, my mother's singing, even my father's grumbling about the weather. Here, the only sounds were the measured tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the occasional murmur of the servants, and the distant sound of Robert's voice on the telephone in his study. He was often away, tending to his various business interests. When he was home, our interactions were cordial but distant. We ate dinner together in the formal dining room, the length of the mahogany table between us. Conversation was sparse, usually about his day, news he'd heard. He never asked about mine, because I had nothing to report. I was a decoration in his house, an attractive, quiet object that completed the picture of a successful man. I began to feel less like a person and more like a piece of furniture, polished, present, but utterly without voice or volition. The reading of the will, after his father's sudden passing, was the first crack in the serene, terrible surface of my new life. I had never been in Robert's study before. It was a masculine room, all leather and dark wood, smelling of cigars and old paper. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, was there, along with two other men Robert introduced as business partners. The air was thick with a tension I didn't understand. Mr. Abernathy read the document in a dry, uninflected tone. I listened, trying to follow the legal language. The condition about an heir stood out to me clearly. It seemed straightforward if old-fashioned. The fortune was to be held in trust until a grandchild was born, ensuring the continuity of the family line. It was about legacy, about the future. I remember thinking it was rather poetic in a stern, legalistic way. Then I looked at Robert. The color had drained from his face, then flooded back in a dark, mottled red. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, were clenched so tightly the knuckles were white. When Mr. Abernathy finished, Robert didn't speak for a moment. Then he exploded. He called the clause an outrage, a humiliation, a posthumous control from a petty, vindictive old man. He shouted about his rights, his work, his due. The partners shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Abernathy remained impassive, simply stating that the will was legal and binding. The meeting ended in a frosty, angry silence. After the others left, Robert poured himself a large drink from a crystal decanter on his desk. He drank it in one long swallow, then poured another. He stood by the window, his back to me, for a long time. When he finally turned, the rage was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm that was somehow more frightening. That's when he came to me, took my face in his hands, and told me the lie. He sold it to me with such conviction, such apparent despair. He was protecting us, he said. From poverty, from ruin. He made me feel that my body, my potential motherhood, was a danger to our very survival. I was so thoroughly conditioned to believe him, to see him as the arbiter of truth and safety, that I accepted this monstrous inversion of reality. I believed I was the problem. I believed my natural function was a threat. That lie became the cornerstone of my prison. The isolation intensified. Visits from my mother became fewer and farther between. Robert would always have a reason why it wasn't a good time. I was resting. We had plans. He was expecting important guests. My letters to Margie went unanswered. I later found out Robert had instructed Mrs. Dobbs to intercept them. I was cut off from my own history, my own identity, until the only reality that remained was the one he constructed for me within those walls. The pressure from the outside world was a constant, low-grade torment. At the few social functions we attended, charity galas, dinners at the country club, the question was inevitable. So, when are you two going to start a family? A handsome couple like you should fill that big house with children. The women would smile at me with a knowing, pitying look if I demurred. The men would clap Robert on the back and make jokes about him not knowing how. Robert would handle it with a practiced, charming deflection. All in good time, or we're enjoying each other's company first. But the ride home was always conducted in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical presence in the car. Once inside the house, the mask would drop. "You see," he'd hiss, his control fraying. "The humiliation everywhere we go, because of that cursed document, because of this situation." He never said because of you, but the words hung in the air, unspoken and more powerful for it. I internalized it all. The loneliness curdled into a deep, abiding shame. I was failing him. I was failing at the one thing that was expected of me, even if, according to his lie, it was the one thing I must not do. The cognitive dissonance was a constant ache. The announcement of the medical consultation came out of the blue. I had not complained of any pain, but Robert was so convincing in his concern. "You've been tired, Alina. You've had a pallor. I've noticed you've been unwell. I've made an appointment with Dr. Sawyer. He's a friend the very best, just to put my mind at ease." His tone was so gentle, so solicitous, that for a fleeting moment I felt a rush of gratitude. He was paying attention. He cared. It was a lifeline in the desert of my loneliness. I went willingly, eager to please, to be the good wife who took care of her health. The clinic was in the city, an hour's drive away. It was modern, clean, impersonal. Dr. Sawyer was a man in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He examined me, asked a few questions, and ordered some routine tests. Robert was in the room for most of it, a silent, watchful presence. A week later, we returned. Robert went into Dr. Sawyer's private office alone. They were in there for what felt like an eternity. When they emerged, Robert's face was a mask of grave concern. Dr. Sawyer's expression was professionally neutral. "Eleanor," Robert said, taking my hand. "The doctor found a small growth, a cyst. It's nothing to be overly alarmed about, but he recommends removing it. A simple procedure." "We've scheduled it for next week." I was stunned, a growth inside me. The word sounded foreign and frightening. I looked at Dr. Sawyer. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's a very routine matter, Mrs. Blackwood. Preventive, you'll be in and out in a day." His voice was calm, reassuring. Between Robert's apparent worry and the doctor's professional assurance, my own doubts seemed childish. Of course they knew best. What did I know about my own body, really? I nodded my consent. The trap was set, and I had walked right into it. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. A deep, formless dread had settled in my stomach. I told myself it was normal preoperative nerves. I told myself I was being silly. Robert was unusually attentive that evening, having Mrs. Dobbs make a light supper I couldn't eat. He even sat with me in the drawing room for a while, making bland conversation about the weather. It felt like the calm before a storm. The morning was bleak, a dense fog clinging to the hills, mooting the world. The drive to the clinic was silent. Robert focused on the road, his profile stern. I remember the click of the car's turn signal was abnormally loud in the quiet. The clinic was even quieter than before, almost deserted. The nurse who checked me in had a cheerful, impersonal efficiency that did nothing to ease my fear. The hospital gown was thin and shapeless. The gurney was cold even through the sheet. The IV needle was a sharp pinch, then a cool sensation spread up my arm. The drugs they gave me to relax did their job too well. They didn't make me calm, they made me detached, a passenger in my own body. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts slow and syrupy. That's when Robert leaned down. The smell of his cologne, usually faint, was suddenly overpowering. His face was very close to mine, and he whispered. He told me everything. He told me about the payment, the conspiracy, the goal. He laid bare his contempt, his calculation, his absolute ownership of my destiny. He spoke not in a rage, but with a quiet, satisfied certainty. It was the truth, finally. The raw, ugly truth he had hidden beneath layers of lies and manipulation. And he told it to me when I was completely incapable of reacting, of fighting back, of even crying out. It was the ultimate act of cruelty, to make me a conscious witness to my own destruction. The paralysis was not just physical, it was a paralysis of the soul. I saw the man I had married for who he truly was, a monster who saw me as livestock to be managed, a problem to be surgically solved. The faint, cruel smile he gave as he left the room is burned into my memory. It was the smile of a man who has just checkmated his opponent. Then came the doctor, Dr. Sawyer. In my drugged haze, he was just another white coat, another instrument of Robert's will. I tried to plead with my eyes, but my eyelids were so heavy. I saw him look at the chart, then at me. Our eyes met. In that moment, something passed between us. He saw my terror. He saw the absolute despair. I saw a flicker in his own eyes, not just professional detachment, but a struggle, a moral conflict. He hesitated. He adjusted the equipment, checked my IV. Then he leaned in as if to adjust the oxygen mask. His movement blocked the view of anyone who might be watching through the small window in the door. His fingers, swift and sure, pressed the tiny, folded square of paper into my palm and curled my numb fingers around it. His whisper was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "After, trust no one." Then the mask was over my face, and the world dissolved into a deep, black nothingness. Waking up was like swimming up from the bottom of a dark, cold ocean. The light was painfully bright. The smell of antiseptic was nauseating. The pain in my abdomen was a dull, persistent throb, a reminder that something had been done to me. The memory returned in a sickening wave. Robert's words, my helplessness, the finality of it. A deep, wrenching sob welled up in my chest, but I choked it back, afraid to make a sound. I was alone in the room. I was ruined. Empty. Then the crinkle. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound in my clenched fist. My fingers were stiff, clumsy. It took immense concentration to open them. The little square of paper, damp with sweat, was there. Unfolding, it was an agony of slow, careful movement. The penciled words, written in a hurried, angular hand, swam before my eyes. I had to read them 3, 4 times before their meaning penetrated the fog of anesthesia and despair. Procedure not performed, only superficial incision. Your pre-op tests confirm pregnancy, approximately 3 weeks. Guard this life. He must not know. S. The world stopped. The pain, the fear, the sterile room, all of it receded into a distant hum. There was only those words and the sudden, shocking, overwhelming reality they conveyed. Life. There was life inside me. The very thing Robert had tried to extinguish was already there, a tiny, fragile flame he hadn't even known existed. And the doctor had not been a collaborator in the end. He had been a savior. He had looked into the abyss of what he was being asked to do and had chosen to throw me a rope instead. The rush of emotions was tidal. A wild, disorienting joy so intense it was painful. A terror so deep it froze my blood. If Robert found out, what would he do? A gratitude towards Dr. Sawyer that felt boundless. And beneath it all, a new, fierce, primal instinct I had never felt before, protection. This was my child, my secret, my power. I had something he could not touch, could not control, did not even know existed. In that moment, the victim died, and a strategist was born. I carefully, meticulously memorized every word on that note. Then I crumpled it into the tiniest ball I could, and when the nurse stepped out briefly, I pushed it deep under the thin mattress. It had to disappear. Robert arrived later, bringing flowers. His performance was flawless. The concerned husband. He asked how I was feeling with a solicitousness that now made my skin crawl. I had to match his performance. I had to be the broken, barren wife he expected to see. I let tears leak from the corners of my eyes. They weren't hard to summon, given the emotional maelstrom inside me, and whispered about loss and emptiness. He patted my hand, his touch making my flesh crawl. "It's for the best, Alina. Now we can move forward, no more pressure." I nodded weakly, playing my part. The ride home was silent again, but the silence was different. Before, it had been empty. Now it was charged with my secret. The house, my gilded cage, was no longer just a prison. It had become a battlefield, and for the first time I had a weapon. The following months were a masterclass in deception. I became a shadow, a ghost in my own home, all the while nurturing a blazing, secret fire within. I complained of lingering fatigue and women's troubles from the surgery to explain my need for rest and my changing body. I took to wearing Robert's old dressing gowns over my clothes, claiming chills. I strategically let out the seams of my dresses myself, in the privacy of my room, a little at a time. When I could, I bought larger garments in town, telling Mrs. Dobbs it was due to comfort after my ordeal. Robert barely looked at me. His mission was accomplished. He was now focused on the next phase of his plan, finding a legal way to break the will's clause or fabricate an heir. He spent long hours in his study with lawyers of a different, shadier sort than Mr. Abernathy. I would hear low voices through the door, discussing things like adoption records and private sanitariums and discreet payments. It made my blood run cold, but it also fueled my resolve. I was not just protecting my baby, I was racing against Robert's next move. Inside, the connection to my child grew with every passing day. In the quiet solitude of my room, I would talk to him. I was certain it was a boy. I told him stories, sang lullabies my mother had sung to me, promised him a world of love and safety. That secret relationship was my sanity. It gave purpose to every cautious step, every fabricated sigh, every obedient nod I gave Robert. The love was ferocious, all-consuming. It was the fuel for my courage. Reaching out to Mr. Abernathy was the riskiest thing I had done since reading the note. I waited for a day Robert was away at a logging camp, supposedly overnight. My hands shook as I dialed the number I had looked up in the directory. His secretary put me off twice. On the third call, my voice broke as I said, "Please tell him it's Alina Blackwood. It's about his father's will. It's urgent." He came on the line. "Mrs. Blackwood." His voice was cautious. I dispensed with all pleasantries. The words tumbled out in a rushed, terrified whisper. "The clause in the will, Robert told me it forbids an heir, that if we have a child, we lose everything." "That's not true, is it? The truth, Mr. Abernathy, please." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. Then quietly, firmly, he said, "That is a blatant falsehood, Mrs. Blackwood. The clause requires an heir for the full inheritance to be released. It is a provision for continuity, not a prohibition." The relief was so profound I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you in danger?" he asked, his tone shifting to one of sharp concern. That question, the simple acknowledgement that my situation might be one of peril, was almost as powerful as the truth about the will. Someone saw, someone understood. I may need help. Soon," I managed to say. "When you need it," he replied without hesitation. "I will be there, you have my word." That phone call was my second lifeline. Clandestine meetings began. They were terrifying and thrilling. Using the excuse of taking air for my constitution, I would walk to a prearranged spot, a quiet city park, a discreet cafe, where Mr. Abernathy would meet me. He brought Dr. Sawyer into the fold. The doctor, it turned out, had been wrestling with his conscience since the moment Robert had first approached him. He had played along initially, hopping to find a way out, and my terrified eyes on the gurney had been the final push he needed. He provided everything. The original test results showing my pregnancy, a detailed affidavit describing Robert's proposal and his own refusal, the surgical report noting only a superficial skin incision. It was a full, documented confession of the plot. Mr. Abernathy's eyes were grim as he reviewed the papers. "This is criminal conspiracy, Mrs. Blackwood. Coercion, fraud, attempted grievous bodily harm. The law is very much on your side, but we must be strategic. We need the right moment, with the right witnesses, to ensure your safety and secure your position irrevocably." We planned like generals preparing for a siege. The right moment presented itself when Robert, growing impatient with his own shady lawyers, decided to try a more direct approach. He planned a dinner for Judge Harland, a respected but aging jurist in the county, and two of the remaining trustees of his father's estate. His goal was to persuade them, over fine food and brandy, to approve a petition to reinterpret the will's clause, based on changed circumstances and his own proven stewardship. He was confident, arrogant. He even boasted to me about it, seeing me as no more threat than the furniture. "This could finally free us from this absurdity, Aliner," he said, not noticing the irony of his words. Mr. Abernathy and I saw our chance. We would use his own stage. The night of the dinner, the house was a portrait of affluent domesticity. Mrs. Dobbs had outdone herself. Crystal gleamed, silver shone, the aroma of roast beef and herbs filled the air. I played my part to perfection, the quiet, decorative hostess, dressed in a loose, high-necked gown that concealed everything. I greeted the judge and the trustees, poured drinks, made bland conversation. I watched Robert hold court, his charm turned up to its maximum setting. He was persuasive, painting himself as the responsible son burdened by an irrational, posthumous whim. The trustees nodded, non-committal. The judge listened, his expression inscrutable. After the dessert was cleared and the port was poured, the men retired to Robert's study for cigars and serious talk. This was it. I excused myself, saying I had a headache. I went upstairs to my room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I changed quickly. The dress I had hidden for this moment was a deep emerald green, of a soft, flowing material that did not hide but accentuated. I let my hair down. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back was not the scared girl from Willow Creek, nor the broken wife from the clinic. She was someone else. She was a mother. She was justice. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked downstairs. The door to the study was slightly ajar. I could see the men inside, a haze of cigar smoke hanging in the air. Robert was speaking, gesturing with his glass. I didn't knock. I simply pushed the door open and stepped inside. The conversation died instantly. All eyes turned to me. The transformation in the room was electric. The trustees' polite masks of attention slipped into pure astonishment. Judge Harlan's bushy eyebrows shot up towards his hairline. Robert was half-turned in his leather chair. He saw me. His eyes traveled from my face down the dress to the unmistakable, rounded curve of my abdomen. For a second, there was only the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Then his glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the Persian rug with a dull thud, the port spreading like a dark bloodstain. His face went from confusion to disbelief to dawning, horrified comprehension. What is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Then it erupted. "Impossible." He roared, lurching to his feet, his chair crashing backward. "You're sterile. I paid to have you cut. This is some trick. A cushion, a lie." The words hung in the shocked silence, vile and self-incriminating. You could have heard a pin drop. Judge Harlan's face had gone from surprise to stern, his eyes like flint. That was my cue. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I spoke calmly, clearly, my voice filling the silent room. "No trick, Robert. The only lie was the one you told me. The will requires an heir. You lied to me to prevent that heir. You took me to a clinic and conspired with a doctor to perform an unnecessary, brutal procedure to ensure I could never give you one. But you failed." I looked at Judge Harlan. "Your Honor," the doctor refused. He documented my pregnancy, which existed at the time of the attempted procedure, and he documented my husband's criminal solicitation. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, has all the proof. As if on cue, Mr. Abernathy, who had been waiting in the hall, entered the study. He placed his leather briefcase on the desk, opened it, and began distributing copies of the affidavits, the medical reports, the damning evidence. Robert stood paralyzed, watching his world disintegrate. He tried to bluster to deny, but the evidence was irrefutable, and his own outburst had been witnessed by a judge and 2 trustees. Judge Harlan skimmed the documents, his jaw tightening. He looked at Robert with open contempt. "Mr. Blackwood, these are very serious allegations, substantiated by credible evidence and your own words. As a judge, I must advise you that you have likely committed several felonies." He turned to Mr. Abernathy. "And the will?" Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "The will of the late Alistair Blackwood contains a standard protective clause for precisely this scenario. In the event of bad faith, fraud, or any action by the heir to prevent the birth of a legitimate descendant, legal guardianship and control of the entire estate passes to the mother of said descendant, to be held in trust for the child. Effective immediately, Mrs. Alina Blackwood is the sole administrator of the Blackwood holdings." He looked at Robert. "You, sir, are entitled to the monthly stipend outlined for noncompliance. Nothing more." The collapse was total. Robert seemed to shrink, the arrogant, commanding figure dissolving into a shell of defeated rage. The trustees, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, immediately began deferring to Mr. Abernathy and me. Judge Harlan suggested that for everyone's safety, Robert should remove himself from the premises that night. He did so, under the cold gaze of the judge, packing a single suitcase like a common tenant being evicted. He didn't look at me as he left. The front door closed behind him with a final, resonant thud. I stood in the grand foyer, my hand on my belly, surrounded by men who were now my allies, in a house that was now mine to control. The silence that followed was not the empty silence of loneliness, but a profound, peaceful quiet. The cage was open. I was free. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legalities and new responsibilities, but they were undertaken with a heart full of hope. Benjamin was born on a bright May morning, a healthy, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, feeling the weight of him in my arms, was a moment of pure, undiluted joy. It was the fulfillment of a promise I had made to him in the dark. A vindication of every fear endured, every lie told, every silent act of defiance. I named him Benjamin because it meant, son of my right hand, my strength, my successor. Robert, as per the legal arrangements, was notified of the birth. He never responded. He never attempted to see his son. He lived on the stipend, moving from one mediocre apartment to another in a city far away, descending into bitterness and drink. I heard through the occasional, unavoidable gossip that he blamed everyone, his father, the lawyer, the doctor, me for his ruin. He died alone a decade later of liver failure. I felt a flicker of pity when I heard, but no grief. He had chosen his path long before I ever met him. My life with Benjamin was everything I had dreamed of during those dark months. I was determined to be the mother I had never had the chance to be in my own childhood, present, affectionate, encouraging. I sold the oppressive mansion and bought a smaller, sun-filled house on the outskirts of Willow Creek, with a big yard and a view of the woods. I wanted Benjamin to have room to run, to explore, to get muddy. I managed the estate with Mr. Abernathy's guidance, learning about timber, investments, and philanthropy. We used the wealth as it should have been used all along, to support the community. We funded a new wing for the county hospital, scholarships for local children, and a women's shelter in the city. The money became a tool for good, a redemption of the legacy that had almost been destroyed by greed. Benjamin grew up kind, intelligent, and grounded. He never took his inheritance for granted. He studied forestry, feeling a deep connection to the land that was his birthright, but he managed it with a conservationist's heart, not a timber baron's greed. He married a wonderful woman named Clara, a teacher, and they gave me 3 grandchildren who are the absolute lights of my life. They live nearby, and my house is always filled with their noise, their artwork on my refrigerator, their laughter in the garden. And me, at 74, I have found a peace I never thought possible. My garden is my sanctuary. I grow roses, not in formal beds, but in wild, tumbling profusion. I grow vegetables and share them with my neighbors. I sit on my porch in the evenings with a cup of tea and a book, listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies. The scars, both physical and emotional, healed long ago. They didn't disappear. They became part of my story, reminders of a strength I didn't know I possessed. The key, my dear friends, was indeed my own hidden truth. The life growing inside me, a truth Robert tried to erase, became the source of my liberation. So if you are listening and you feel trapped, controlled, or belittled, please hear this. Your truth matters, your voice matters. The very thing someone tries to suppress in you might be the source of your greatest power. It might be a dream, a talent, a perspective, or a simple, stubborn knowing of what is right. Nurture it in secret if you must. Guard it fiercely. Find your one ally, your Mr. Abernathy or Dr. Sawyer. And when the moment is right, step into the light and speak it. The cage cannot hold you once you realize you hold the key. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with me, for listening to an old woman's story. If it moved you, if it gave you a spark of hope, please do like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought. Your support means these stories can travel further, perhaps to someone who needs to hear them most tonight. In the comments, I'd love to know, what single word defines courage for you? Is it perseverance? Truth? Love? I read every single one. Remember, my dear friends, even in the deepest, coldest winter, a seed is waiting underground, gathering its strength, waiting for its moment to rise. May you find your spring. Thank you for listening.